Tonight we're going to go into some of the fish that are more common to the MAINSTEM, and then we're also going to talk about some species that are on the rare and uncommon side throughout the journey. So you want to go to the first slide, Matt?
Yeah.
So the first thing is to do a little bit of cleanup. Go back to the tolerance slide. That's the first one we need to cover. Sorry about bouncing around, but there's a couple things here. I just wanted to correct one thing. Last night we had the moderately tolerant labeled as moderately intolerant, so we corrected that. And this is the hierarchy of Ohio EPA pollution tolerance designations. And we described that last night. For those of you who weren't present, reason these are important, they factor into things like the index of biotic integrity, which lends to how Ohio EPA classifies streams as either meeting their designated uses or being impaired. So, okay, and Matt will be referring to these, you know, with each species. Okay, if you can go to the slide you were on. Okay, so we received a couple of questions today after the session last night. One question dealt with the presence of Muskellunge in the Little Miami, and we'll be talking about that. That's one of the species we have included for tonight. Someone asked also about seining regulations and how-tos. Ohio EPA does describe a protocol for seining in their biocriteria manuals, although they do not currently use it. They've replaced it over the years with just strictly electrofishing. In terms of what a person is allowed to do, there are, if you do not have a scientific collecting permit and have seining specifically mentioned in that permit, you can still seine fish provided you have an Ohio fishing license. But that restricts you to a no larger than 4x8 seine and a minimum mesh size. That really should be a 1/4 inch mesh size. So, and that also applies to non-game fish and non-listed fish as well. There are a number of other resources about using seines to, you know, do more citizen science related types of things. And I found a number of videos on YouTube. So I think all you have to do is Google fish seining and those will pop up. And also, not that anybody would be out doing seining at night, but it is prohibited between 9 p.m. and 4 a.m. in the morning. Okay, so that covers the two questions that we had last night, and we're going to take some follow-up. We're going to take some follow-up after Matt and Ed do the presentation. So I'm going to turn over to Matt to begin his presentation.
All right, so we're going to start with fairly common fish in the Little Miami River that we didn't go over yesterday. And we're going to start with sucker species. This is a silver redhorse. It's a really deep-bodied species. And it gets fairly large, almost 2 feet in length. It can. There's two really good identifying characteristics other than it being deeper bodied than the other red horse. It has a dorsal ray count of 15 to 16. Usually you're looking at 12 to 14 for other species of red horse. So it's got a larger dorsal fin. And it also has along with the other suckers, a unique lips. The bottom lip will actually, when it has a fully closed mouth, look like it's almost not even there. So the upper lip will encompass the lower lip. So, and that's one of the really good characteristics for identifying it. And like the golden and black redhorse, this species also has a slate-colored fin, caudal fin. These guys like pools, deep pools. They don't like silt because they scavenge for macroinvertebrates on the bottom. They're fairly common if you get them in the moderate to larger streams that are pretty nice. They're moderately intolerant of pollution, and really boat electrofishing is the best way to get them because they like the larger streams. The smallmouth redhorse, these guys, like their name says, they do have a small mouth, but what they also have is a really small head. It's a lot shorter than a golden or black redhorse or any of the other species, really. They also have a red tail. So immediately that makes them much different than the other redhorse species like the black or golden. And they also have this kind of sickle fin shaped dorsal fin. And that's just them. There's another species of redhorse in Ohio that's in the Lake Erie drainage that looks very similar to this, actually almost exactly, except their dorsal fin won't be that sickle fin shaped when it's closed like that. But you won't have to worry about it in Little Miami drainage because it's not there. So, and these guys, they love fast water. They're in deep runs, fast moving current, sand, gravel, bottoms. They'll spawn in the smaller streams in the spring and then move to their summer feeding grounds like in the Little Miami. And then really common in high gradient. Generally when you get one, there's a bunch. They're moderately intolerant as well. It's kind of a theme with redhorse. They don't like a lot of pollution. And because of where they're located, boat shocking is the best method. You really won't be able to get them with a net in these fast runs. River redhorse, these guys are really cool. They also have that red caudal fin. They almost look like a golden redhorse. They get similar size, if not a bit bigger. But that red caudal fin is the immediate giveaway that it's not a golden redhorse. And they also have a really big head versus most of the other species. These guys, just like the smallmouth redhorse, they like deep, fast runs, clean gravel, cobble, boulders. They are uncommon in Little Miami, but they're really common in the Great Miami. As long as you get a deep, fast run in the Little Miami, I generally get a couple, maybe one, two. I think the most I've gotten in 4 is at a site. These guys are really intolerant. They don't like a lot of pollution. And again, because of where they're at, boat electrofishing is the method used to collect them. So quillbacks, these guys have this kind of golden silvery color. The dorsal fin's kind of hard to see on this picture, but it's really long. The first few dorsal rays are really long. They actually will fold back and almost touch the caudal fin when it's closed. And another characteristic that separates them from other carp sucker species is the fact that they don't have a nipple on their lower lip. It's smoother. You'll see what I'm talking about on the next slide when we look at river carp suckers. These guys like low gradient streams, generally medium sized, sandy muck bottoms. So they're fairly common when they're found. They school together, so there could be pretty large schools. Boat electrofishing, maybe wading if you're quick enough. Seining, you'd have to be really skilled in order to get them, but they are in moderate-sized streams in the pools, so you might be able to wade after them. So the river carp sucker is a larger species. It's larger than the quillback, and it has the nipple on the lower lip, which is immediately distinguishing characteristic. That's generally what I go for first when distinguishing between the two. And then also the dorsal, you can see, is much shorter, the rays. So those are pretty good giveaways when you're looking at them. These guys are in deep pools, generally backwaters of the Ohio River. They will come up a little bit so long as you can get a deep pool. And again, because they're in the deeper pools, you're gonna have to use a boat electrofishing system. Here we have buffaloes. We're gonna look at 3 of them. Smallmouth here, these are really deep bodied. They are this kind of grayish, brownish, and they can get pretty large. Not as large as the Bigmouth Buffalo, which you'll see here in a couple slides, but 2 feet is possible. They like the deeper, swift-flowing waters, so you'll find them in the same areas as the smallmouth redhorse and river redhorse, and they like to school together as well. So where there's one, there's probably many. They're pretty common in moderate and large rivers, and because of their habitat preference, boat electrofishing is the way to go. So black buffalo, these guys can get pretty tricky when trying to identify the black buffalo versus smallmouth. And what's fun with them is they can also hybridize. But if you get a really good specimen of a black buffalo, these guys are torpedo shaped. They have this kind of rounded head, and they don't have that high back that we saw in smallmouth buffalo. And so their mouth shape is a bit different. This guy is shooting his out, but it actually will go more forward than the smallmouth buffalo. The smallmouth buffalo actually be pretty much straight down as another characteristic. These guys are found in a wide range of habitats. They don't like as much flow as the smallmouth buffaloes, though. Pools and runs, like I said, not as quick moving as the smallmouth buffalo. They're uncommon. We generally find more smallmouth buffalo in Ohio than black buffalo. And again, because they like the bigger waters, boat electrofishing is the best way to get them. So bigmouth buffalo, these guys can get quite large. 60 pounds in the lower Ohio River. I think that's been recorded. These guys, also a study just came out in Nature, which I have supplied a link for it. Did a study, and they were collecting specimens more than 100 years old. So this might be the longest lived fish that's, well, it could be the longest lived fish in North America that's not a sturgeon. So these guys, quick and easy way to identify them is they have this terminal mouth. It's straightforward. You can kind of find these guys, I think Trotman said, in the same areas you find carp. So they like shallow pools and large streams. The bottoms really doesn't matter. They're not as common as the other species. We still do find them in the lower end of the Little Miami. And again, because of their habitat preferences, boat electrofishing is the best method. Freshwater drum, these guys are pretty common, and if you go fishing on Lake Erie, they are bait stealers. These guys
Right.
are, I don't really have good characteristics to kind of separate them out. A freshwater drum, they have this rounded caudal fin, large, soft dorsal, silvery, and again, this terminal mouth. They deep pools, large rivers. They're really common. Obviously, fishing for them. If you try to fish for smallmouth bass or walleye or something, these guys could easily steal your bait. And then boat electrofishing as well. There is possibility that you could get juveniles or young of year in smaller waters, but they generally like the bigger bodies of water. Channel catfish here, they have this deep forked tail. And then juveniles will have these black spots along their body. So those are really good characteristics for a juvenile versus something like a blue catfish. The adults will have a rounded anal fin, as opposed to a blue catfish, which you generally don't see. Theirs will actually be squared off. So those are good characteristics to use. Coloration's a bit different too. Blue catfish is really light, and these guys are a grayish blue. Their habitat: deep pools, large rivers, sand, gravel, cobble, boulder. They generally feed at night, so they stay deep in the deep pools during the day, and then they'll come up in the shallows at night. They're really common pretty much everywhere. And then you can get juveniles in smaller to moderate streams that actually have some flow too. They generally like that as juveniles are young a year. And boat electrofishing, hook and line. And if you can get juveniles in a seine, you do that in smaller streams, the moderate streams. Although I wouldn't recommend it. They are really hard to get out of a net. White bass, I wouldn't say they're common in the Little Miami, but we're going to look at something that is the hybrid Morone, the white bass, striped bass hybrid here in a few slides. So I figured it'd be a good idea to look at both striped bass and white bass so that you can see where some of the shape comes from for the hybrids. So the white bass here, they have this deep body, and they also have these lines, but only one of them will be connected to all the way to the tail. And also, if you look in their mouth, the white bass has a single tongue patch in the middle. It's I don't know how to describe. Don't know really how to describe the feeling. It's kind of a rough patch right in the middle of its tongue. And these guys will prefer pools, generally less than 30 feet of water. They will come into the shallows and at night for feeding. They'll follow the minnows up from the pools. They can be common in really large rivers, but they generally stay in those large rivers like the Ohio. You could get them in the backwater down below Beachmont Avenue. So because of their habitat, boat electrofishing, also hook and line, you can catch them then. And here, the striped bass, which are really uncommon. These guys, you can see they're narrow-bodied. They have two tongue patches on this. They have one on each side of their tongue. And more than one stripe will actually go back and connect to the tail. These guys are generally, I think they're continually stocked by Kentucky. They were stocked by ODNR in the 60s, but that has since stopped. Large rivers, primarily to the Ohio. They will make it into the backwaters occasionally. I don't think it's very common though. And Kentucky still stocks them. So because of their habitat preferences, again, boat electrofishing and hook and line. This one is the common one in the Little Miami. This one it's seemingly in every run. So you can see it gets its striping pattern from the striped bass, but it's got more of the body of a white bass. The tongue patches can be either or. It can either have 2 or 1. It just depends on the individual. And these guys get considerably larger than the white bass as well. Even though they're shaped like them, they get much, much bigger. These are stocked, obviously. Kentucky has an active program. They really like the fast runs, sit next to it, jump in and out for feeding, and hook and line. Obviously, people love to go fishing for them, and then boat electrofishing if you're sampling. Sauger here, similar to walleye, a few little differences. The pattern in the spiny dorsal fin is spotting. So they have these row of spots in each of the webbing between the spines. And another difference is, even though there's a bit of white here, there's none here, it's really bright on a walleye. And it's much more subdued here on the sauger and pretty much absent on the caudal fin. These guys like large rivers, deep pools. Compared to the walleye like clear water. Here, the sauger likes turbid. Night feeders, because they're a visual predator, they follow their prey from the pools up into the shallows at night. Boat electrofishing or hook and line is the way to catch these guys. So walleye, as you can see with the dorsal fin, rather than the spotting, you have dark streaks in the webbing. And at the base of the spiny dorsal, you have this dark dorsal spot. And the edges of the caudal fin and anal fin have these bright white streaks. So those are the distinguishing characteristics for the walleye versus the sauger. Like the sauger, these guys like large rivers, pools, but they like the clearer waters. They're highly migratory. They'll migrate for breeding purposes. In the spring, they'll go into shallower waters, and then they'll return to larger waters for the summer months and winter. They're also a visual predator, so again, feeding at night. They're common in clear waters, uncommon to rare and turbid. And then again, because of their habitat preferences, boat electrofishing or hook and line to catch them. And so Ohio DNR really likes to hybridize species. So here we have an ODNR creation, the Bigeye. So it's a sauger by a walleye. They use a female walleye and a male sauger to make this fish. So you can see they kind of have a bit of each attributes. So in the dorsal fin, they have the streaks and the spotting, so the streaks won't be connected because you get these spots. And then they will have the white tips to the anal fin and caudal fin, but that could vary on individual because of the genetics from the sauger. I showed you this because these guys are readily stocked across Ohio, so escapees happen, and it's very much possible that they pop up. Again, because they are a hybrid between the two sander species, the walleye and the sauger, boat electrofishing or hook and line, because they like those deep pools as the parent species. So this guy is pretty rare. The short-nosed gar is actually state endangered here in Ohio. They like oxbows, backwaters, slow-moving waters. Generally in the Ohio River, they do make their way into the backwater in the Little Miami. The top picture is actually a specimen we collected this past year just upstream of Beachmont Avenue. These guys, compared to the Longnose Gar, they have a short rounded snout here, as you can see, and their paired fins are not spotted. That would be if you got a specimen that had the spotting on both paired fins, both the pelvic and pectoral. You could be looking at a couple different things. One, it could be a hybrid between a long nose and a short nose gar. That does happen. Or you could be looking at a spotted gar if there is spotting across the mouth. So again, this guy's not very common in the Little Miami because of good flowing water that the Little Miami has. And the best way to catch them, you probably get them hook and line. I don't think too many people target gar, but you can. And then boat electrofishing because they like the big, slow water. Here, you have the Longnose Gar. The top is an adult. You can see the very long mouth, the snout, with the tiny teeth that they use to catch minnows. Common misconception is that these guys go after sports fish like bass, and people do some not so nice things to this species because of their bad reputation that they really actually don't have. These guys just want minnows. They don't want your sports fish. These guys will generally feed in flowing water in order to collect the minnows, but they generally spend their day hanging out in sluggish waters, pools, oxbows. They're pretty common when they're found. I mean, in the lower end, you could easily collect, multiple individuals in a very short distance. And what I thought was interesting was the collection rate versus the habitat score. You collect a lot more individuals, or there's a higher percentage collection or probability of collection when the habitat score is better. And I think part of that is because they like to use the runs in order to feed. But that's really interesting for something generally you think would hang out in just sluggish pools all day. And because of their habitat preference, the deep pools, hook and line, obviously, and then boat electrofishing are the best ways. You probably can sing for the juvenile. You have a picture of a young of a year right here. Those guys will be found in smaller waters, trying to hide in vegetation and stuff. It's possible to get those with the seine, but really the best methods for the adult are the electrofishing or going fishing for them. Pumpkin seeds, they have, versus some of the other sunfish species that we already talked about, like bluegill and green sunfish. This species has a pointed pectoral fin, just like the bluegill, but it's much shorter. It's short like you'd see on a green sunfish. So it's nice and short. It's about here is where it stops. And then what it also has is you can see kind of the spotting here that occurs in the soft dorsal. So that's a good use of the coloration in the dorsal fin here versus what a bluegill would have was just that dark caudal spot, the black spot there. Also, this fish has a soft or stiff apical flap. Means if you tried to bend it forward, it would actually break. It wouldn't be really flexible. And they generally have a white border. as well, right along here. They generally like slow moving water, sluggish, non-flowing pools. Habitat, or the substrates really didn't matter, but they really liked dense vegetation. They're less common than bluegill and green sunfish, but they are moderately tolerant, just as the bluegill. And again, hook and line, they inhabit a lot of different size streams, so most forms of electrofishing, and then you could probably seine for them too if you wanted to go through vegetation with your net. Orange-spotted sunfish, these guys are really pretty. You can see they have the orange spotting along the side. They also have this bright white outline on the males of the opercle flap, which is, this one is actually flexible. You can bend it back and forth and it won't do any harm. And those are really the best methods. These guys are really small as well. As you can see in my hand, I'm holding adult males in both the top and bottom picture, and they're as long as my fingers. They're not really big at all. You know, maybe 4 inches, 5 inches or so. 3.5 inches is what Trotman said. So habitat, they like pools, low gradient streams. They really like silt and turbid waters. They don't do well in clear streams for whatever reason. Again, in those streams that meet those criteria, they're pretty common. Wading and backpack electrofishing gear are good for collection, seining, and like most of these fish talked about yesterday a little bit. I mentioned microfishing. You could probably microfish for them as well. Crappie. So you have 2 species. You have black and white. The easiest way to distinguish them is the dorsal spines. If you get kind of confused on the patterning, the pattern on the side here, that's vertical bars generally for white crappie. I had a technician a few years ago say, if the pattern makes sense, then it's a white crappie. So you have the bars that make sense. You have a white crappie. But if you get confused as to the patterning, best way, 5 to 6 dorsal spines for white crappie. You'll get 7 to 8 on a black. So that's the quickest, easiest way. And also, one of the things that it kind of looks like it has a receding hairline too on the white crappie. Is another way it was kind of described to me, which makes sense because hair should be here. Nope, it's all the way back there. So these guys are also inhabitants of sluggish pools, low gradient. These guys prefer turbid conditions versus the black crappie. They're pretty uncommon outside of reservoirs because they're pretty easy snacks for pikes, muskies, pickerels, species like that. Obviously hook and line, a lot of people go fishing for them, and then boat electrofishing because of the deep pools they prefer. So here you have the black crappie. Again, 7 to 8 dorsal spines. This picture, you couldn't get the crappie to display very well. But again, and also the pattern, you can see it's not really bars, it's just kind of scattered dark pigment. These guys, they like the same habitat as the white crappie, but clear water is preferred with a lot of vegetation. Again, these guys are also uncommon outside of reservoirs because they don't do well in turbid waters that we generally find in Ohio. And also they're snacks for a lot of different species of fish. And just like the white crappie, hook and line, obviously, and then boat electrofishing for collection. So here we're going to get into pickerel, pike, and muskies. I know we got a question yesterday about muskies. As you can see with the pickerel here, this is the baby of the bunch. These guys are the smallest species, and they all generally like the same habitat, pools. These guys like the smaller streams. They like a lot of vegetation as well. They're pretty common when they're found, and because of where they are, you can do all forms of electrofishing, seine for them because of the small streams. Best way to identify these guys, the patterning is a little different on the side for each of these species, but the really big thing is the scaling on the cheek and the opercle. If you have a fully scaled cheek and fully scaled opercle, you're looking at a pickerel. As you go up in size and species, you'll see here that you'll get less and less scales on the cheek and opercle. And Ed was kind enough to use the Power BI this afternoon and get us a map of these guys, as well as the next couple of species. And these guys are, as you can see, they're more in the upper portion of the watershed where you're looking at probably lower gradient streams. Again, here with a pike, you can see here you have less scales now on the opercle. You still have the full cheek, wholly scaled, but again, the scales on the opercle, they end here. The lower half does not have scales. It's just the upper half. And these guys, again, same habitat, pools, low gradient streams with a lot of vegetation. It's kind of why you see the probability of collection go down with increased habitat score. You'll collect more specimens in sites that are generally would not have riffles or runs because they like the pools, they like the sluggish waters. So as you find more of those habitats in the stream, will be less likely to find these pike. And these guys have only been found in a couple spots, and this is right there downstream of that reservoir on Caesar Creek. These guys are likely stocked by DNR. I think that's who stocks that reservoir there. So these are escapees, likely. So I wouldn't expect to see too many specimens or records. And again, for collection, hook and line, a lot of people like going fishing for these guys. And then all forms of electrofishing. You can get juveniles in smaller streams, so it's possible to hit them with a backpack if you're in the right spot. And then here with the muskie, again, only a few collections, only a few sites. Again, downstream of Caesar Creek with the reservoir. Well, so with these guys, actually the scales stop up here on both the cheek and the opercle. I guess when I moved this earlier to fit in the map, I didn't quite get the line here, but it's up here. Scales are, the top half are scaled, the bottom half are not on the muskie. So the biggest species of the Esox genus has the least amount of scales on the opercle and the cheek. Again, these guys like pools and clear water, abundant vegetation, so that they because they're ambush predators, all these species, so they like to hide and then reach out to collect their prey. And obviously hook and line for all of you that really love to go out there for big fish and boat electrofishing. Here's one of the prettier darters here in Ohio. these guys are really great to see. They like very specific habitat, moderate to large streams, deep, fast riffles, clean bottom of cobble and boulder. They're uncommon. When we get them, or when I've collected them, we've only gotten a couple at the site. So these guys are really nice to see because they're a really good identifier of good water quality, really good habitat. So whenever we get them, I'm pretty excited. So because they like these larger waters with high gradient, you probably can seine for them. The riffles may get a little deep and fast for most people. So it's not necessarily something I'd recommend in order to go find one, but maybe. But boat, wading, electrofishing are the best methods. And these guys, because of their habitat preference and their intolerance to pollution, they are considered intolerant by Ohio EPA. The black side darter is similar to the dusky darter. The dusky darter is not in the Little Miami drainage. So this is the only species that will look like this. But as a comparison of the two species, both species will have these dark blotches down the side. The black side will have this well-defined teardrop. The dusky darter, it won't go as far. It'll just come down part of the way. And the black side will also have 3 distinct black spots on the caudal peduncle, while the dusky darter, the bottom 2 will be connected. And another really good way to separate them, if you look right below the gills on the underside, I don't have a picture of it, unfortunately, but the gill coverings are connected by a piece of tissue. And if it's broadly connected, so if it's connected closer to the pectoral fins, then you're looking at a dusky darter. If it's not connected all the way out here, it's more towards the mouth, then you have a black side. This species inhabits moderate streams, moderate gradient. They like sand and gravel. I generally find them over more fine gravel and sand. They're kind of uncommon in the Little Miami, but you can get them with all forms of electrofishing. And if you're in a smaller stream, you might be able to get them with the seine. They like to really hang out in woody debris, which would make seining a little more difficult, but that's their generally preferred habitat. The river chub is also an exciting fish to see when we get them. These guys are pretty habitat specific. They like moderate to large streams, high gradient, cobble, gravel, boulder substrates. They're fairly common in the Little Miami, not as common in the tributaries because they like the bigger waters. The species looks really similar to the Hornyhead Chub. There's a few subtle differences. So the top is a breeding male, and the tubercle location on these are different than Hornyhead. Hornyhead will have their tubercles on top of their head, as we'll see, I think, on the next slide. And the river chub only has it on the front. And then when you're looking at a specimen not in color, as you do on the bottom, it has a really pointed face. The Hornyhead chub will as well, but this is a bit more exaggerated than a Hornyhead chub. So, and then the Hornyhead chub, you'll see on the next slide that the males will have this red patch right behind the eye. And so when collecting these guys, because of their preferences for bigger waters, boat electrofishing, maybe a seine because they like the runs, but generally boat electrofishing is the way to go. And here you, with the Hornyhead Chub, again, the tubercles on top of the head. And then you have this red patch here on the males that are not in color, like this one here on the bottom. And you generally don't find the two species together, so you probably wouldn't have to worry too much about differentiating them. These Hornyhead Chubs like smaller streams, slower flows. They do like the riffles and runs, but not the deep fast ones like the river chub. There are records in the Little Miami. They're in the headwaters. They like the river chubs. They build nests in the spring that eventually other minnows, shiners will use for their breeding. And then you can collect these guys with all methods of electrofishing, and then seining as well because of the smaller waters. And like the river chub, you generally have a better probability of collection when the habitat score is much better, because they like nice substrates that are silt free or have very little silt on them. So the better the habitat, the more likely you are to catch them. Gravel chubs, also something really nice to see. They're uncommon in Little Miami, but they're definitely inhabiting some of the riffles. They like the riffles, bars, the gravel bars, gravel, sand, cobble substrates generally. These guys are moderately intolerant to pollution, which is why they're pretty nice to see. It's really nice to see when you get gravel chub, variegated darters, and something I'll discuss later, the mountain madtom at the same site. Those are always exciting. Again, so because their habitat preference, boat and wading are the best. You probably can get them with the seine in the more moderate sized streams in the base of the runs. These guys are actually state threatened, so if you see one, you got to put it back. And again, as habitat scores go up, you have a better probability of collecting them because they like the riffles of larger and silt-free substrates. And so we'll go on to uncommon and rare fish. So these are species that only have a few collections on record, or they're very similar to some of the other species that maybe there was historic records collected by ichthyologists in the past, but nothing recent. So we'll start with the blue sucker. These guys are always really cool to see. They have that bluish purplish tinge to them, and the very interesting lips. Those are basically just it. This is the only species that really has something like that in Ohio. They like clear water, a lot of flow. These guys like the deep, fast runs is where they hang out. They're really intolerant of pollution. They won't be anywhere where there's much of any. And because their habitat preference, boat electrofishing is the best way to collect them. And because they're pretty rare, they are a state threatened species. So yesterday we talked about the blunt-nosed minnow and the fathead minnow. This is another Pomephilus species that inhabits large rivers and likes deep pools. So these guys are really similar. They're more similar to a blunt-nosed minnow. And like the other two, they have the small predorsal scales and they have the dark caudal spot. Best way to differentiate them from a blunt-nosed minnow is kind of body shape. These guys don't get as long, but they're a little bit deeper bodied. It takes a bit of training in order to see the difference between the two species if you get them in the same spot. It took me a little while to get the hang of identifying them. Because they like the big waters, generally something like the Ohio River. They're uncommon in the Little Miami. Might get them in the backwater. So boat fishing or maybe a bottom trawl or something like that to collect them. Bigeye Chubs. So this is a species that really had declined a lot in Ohio through the course of increased human population. And thankfully, in some of the different waterways, it's made quite the comeback. It's not necessarily the case in the Little Miami, unfortunately. But it is an intolerant species. It does not like silt at all. Generally like medium-sized streams, moderate gradients. They like fine gravel and sand, again, free of silt. You can collect these guys. Generally, I'd say wading electrofishing would be best. You might be able to get them with a backpack in some of the smaller, moderate-sized streams. And you probably get them with the seine as well. But as far as identification for these guys, because they look pretty similar to yes, like I talked about yesterday, the sand shiner. You start with the sand shiner and then you work your way out. You prove it's not a sand shiner. So these guys have long barbels, which immediately means it's not a shiner. And then what it will also have is a really long snout and a large eye. These guys are kind of nondescript other than the long barbel and the longer snout and large eye. Again, with better habitat, you're more likely to collect this species. That's kind of a theme with a lot of these species we're talking about today. They can be habitat specific and they generally like really nice habitat. The Bigeye shiner is really rare. I think maybe Ed will have to correct me later, but I think O'Bannon Creek was where there's a small population still left. But again, these guys are intolerant of pollution. You can probably seine for it backpack because they like pools and small streams, but they really like silt-free substrates. Sand, gravel, bedrock. For identification, you can see this eye is really, really large. And then another distinguishing characteristic versus the sand shiner is this black stripe that extends laterally along the body will go to the nose and actually go and extend on the chin as well. So that is something that I think only historically one other species in Ohio, the black chin shiner, had. So you have a 50-50 chance, and I don't even know if the black chin shiner is still in Ohio. I don't know if it's been extirpated, but the black chin, black on the nose, and the giant eye. The black is a Bigeye shiner. And again, very rare, state endangered. If you see one, you got to put it back. So a gilt darter, unfortunately, is something that no one will likely see. These guys were considered extirpated from Ohio until 2010 when a specimen was collected in the Ohio River on the Ohio side off of a gravel bar. More collections have been made, but they've been in the Ohio River and Beaver Creek on the eastern side of Ohio near the Pennsylvania border. So these guys unfortunately won't be seeing in the Little Miami unless they make a good comeback. but they really like deep, fast riffles, large rivers, gravel, cobble substrates. State endangered, once extirpated, so right now we have a very small population inhabiting the state. It's intolerant, and benthic trawls is probably the way to get them because right now it's mostly in the Ohio River. Slenderhead darters, these guys are really cool looking. This guy's a little faded, but they have these black blotches like the black-side darter. But what separates them out is they have no teardrop. They have a longer snout, and they'll have this orange band running through their spiny dorsal fin. They like riffles or gravel bars with sand and small gravel that's silt-free. They're uncommon in the LMR. They're intolerant, but because of their habitat preferences, you might be able to get them with a seine off of a gravel bar, but generally boat electrofishing and trawling too would be the way to go. So flathead catfish, deep sluggish pools, low gradient. They, again, like most catfish, they feed at night. They have obviously that very, very broad head that is very flat, where they get their name. They're uncommon in the Little Miami. Hook and line, really best method. You can get them, obviously we've gotten them electrofishing, but hook and line is the way to go. And these guys get big. Coworker Vicky there is holding a 60-pounder. Brindle Madtoms, these guys are in the tributaries of the Little Miami in places. These guys, unlike the similarly looking mountain and northern Madtoms, they like pools, low gradient streams. We generally find them in woody debris or root wads, root mats, something like that, versus the other two species, which we'll be talking about next. These guys are also intolerant like the next two species, and because these guys generally are in smaller streams, backpack electrofishing, obviously wading electrofishing, or a seine can be used to get them. And here, the mountain madtom, it is state endangered. It's uncommon in Little Miami. I think our last survey in 2017 that we conducted, there was a total of 24 specimens collected over the course of 34 sampling events in the Little Miami. So they're uncommon. They're there though. Part of the reason why we didn't collect quite as many as I was hoping to. They're nocturnal. They like to be down in the pools at night, or during the day, and then at night they'll come up into the preferred habitat where they're generally collected. Deep, wide riffles, fast water, cobble boulder bottoms, where they feed. So collecting them, you can get them with a seine when they're in the shallower areas. Backpack electrofisher if you're just targeting a riffle. We generally get them with the boat when we're lucky. So distinguishing characteristic for these guys, didn't really go through the brindled, but with the brindled, you saw that the stripe on the adipose fin went all the way over top. Once you get that, you know it's a brindled. Here, the dark marking barely goes up onto the adipose fin, which is something that's kind of in common with the next specimen, the northern madtom. But in order to separate those two, the mountain madtom does not have this mid-caudal stripe. It'll be a black stripe that runs right along here. Some specimens will have it, but it'll be fairly faint, or like this one you can see here, doesn't have it at all. On this one, it might be faint, like right through here. And really the big thing that I like to use is there's this bony structure that protrudes out along the side of the body. It's really small on the mountain madtom. It's really short. So it's described in the Fishes of Ohio by Trotman as being less than the length of the spine and its barbs. So it's really short. And then for the northern madtom, you can see here it's really long. It'll be longer than the width of the spine and then the barbs. And then it also has, it's faint in this picture, but it's right here, is this dark caudal stripe. So it's I wish he had a better picture, but so it's right here on this one. And it's usually more pronounced, but it's right there. And then the dark marking on the adipose fin goes up, but not to the top on the northern madtom. But what's another unfortunate thing with this species is currently there's only one accepted record in the Little Miami, and that was the first record by Milton Trotman, who wrote The Fishes of Ohio. That's the only one, and that was way back when. So it's not something that's likely in the drainage, although if you find it, that's a big find. So the habitat preferences, if you're going to go looking, it's the same as the mountain madtom. They like to inhabit the same places, although they're very rarely found in the same riffle together. Like the mountain madtom and the brindle, these guys are intolerant, and like the mountain madtom, again, it is state endangered. So if you see it, take a picture and put it back. And then collection is obviously the same as the mountain because of the habitat preference. Another species of madtom here, this one is a lot more common in low gradient streams with a lot of muck and detritus, like decaying leaves on the bottom. It's a little more rare in the tributaries, especially towards the lower end of the Little Miami. You can get these guys in any size stream, really. And then you can do obviously all methods of electrofishing, and you can seine for them as well. With these guys, you can see here, like a tadpole, the tail looks very much like a tadpole with the adipose fin connected to the caudal fin. And then the caudal fin versus the other species of madtom, this one is rounded while the others are squared off. And these guys generally, they look a bit chunkier than the other species as well. Something that's kind of uncommon, don't run into too often, but it's kind of cool when you do, the moon eye. These guys kind of look like a gizzard shad, which we looked at yesterday, but obviously they have a more sleek body, less body depth. They also have this enormous eye, which is silvery in color. And their dorsal fin is set behind their pelvic fin as well. That's an important characteristic when you're looking at a similar species called the gold eye, which will have the pelvic fin behind the dorsal fin insertion, and will have actually a gold eye. These, like I said, these guys like swift flowing waters, large rivers, clear water, because obviously with the large eye, they're a visual predator. They're uncommon, but you do get them in the Little Miami, absent from the tributaries. These guys are also considered intolerant to pollution. And again, because of their habitat preferences with the swift flowing deeper waters, deeper runs of large rivers, boat electrofishing for collection. Something else that's kind of similar to a gizzard shad is the skipjack herring. They're kind of uncommon. They come out of the Ohio, but they do like clear waters. Obviously, near the mouth of the tributary, or near the mouth of the Ohio, or of tributaries to the Ohio. With these guys, obviously, they're deeper bodied than a moon eye. They don't have that large eye. They do have a dark spot behind their opercle. They may even get a series of them. This guy has a little subdued coloring. But the big thing with skipjacks is that mouth. It's really upturned. It's really long. The lower jaw is really long, and it actually, when it's closed, you can see this is the edge of the jaw. It actually protrudes out over the upper jaw. So that's how you identify those. And since these guys are in the backwaters of the tribs to the Ohio, boat electrofishing is the way to collect these guys. So this is our last fish of the presentation. While this is not a fun one to talk about, the silver carp has been collected in the lower end of the Little Miami. So it's something we're gonna have to watch out for. These guys have that strange head, small eye. They're filter feeders, so they generally like the bigger waters and the lower end of tributaries to something like the Ohio. So again, reported observations in the lower Little Miami River, just in the backwater section. And then with these guys, they're collected with boat electrofishing, gill nets, trawls. And if you get one, this one you don't put back. And then here's our references for our presentation. And then I'll toss it over to Ed.
Okay, I have a few slides to talk about a little app we're thinking about trying to develop where, based on species you collect, for example, you take the two most sensitive fish species, you can enter them in and generally like a range of stream sizes, and then it would give you some information back about the quality of the stream. So it would use that presence-absence data and to sort of predict the IBI probability of getting certain ranges of IBIs. Now, what the IBI is, the Ohio Fish Assemblage Index, used to assess ecological condition in Ohio. It's what's called a multi-metric index. It uses multiple measures of fish assemblage condition to measure the overall condition of the community. And it's similar to what people watching the news, you might hear the on the news talk about the index of leading economic indicators. That's a similar idea where they'll look at multiple measures, GNP, job growth, etc. They come up with an overall measure of the health of the economy. So it's a similar process, and this is Ohio has calibrated this based on reference sites around the state. An example metric in it are the total species, darter species, sucker, sensitive species, percent top carnivores. So it looks at some of the feeding components, percent insectivores, and then things like anomalies. Are the fish, do they have tumors and lesions and so on? So this is what Ohio uses, and they have a biocriteria in the state that provides basically the baseline for different streams. And what's one neat thing about it is that it's a tiered series of criteria. So Ohio recognizes that Little Miami River and some of the better tribs have actually higher quality, are termed exceptional warm water habitat streams, and they have higher benchmarks than a general warm water stream. There's also modified streams and so on. So the idea is that you can use 2 or 3 sensitive species that you might collect in whether you're seining or electrofishing or hook and line. Even if you get it doesn't have to be at any certain time. You could say, over a number of samples, what are the most sensitive species? And the idea is you'd have we're going to build this app to let you see what kind of ranges you would get. So the most accurate measure, this is based on that level 3 biosurvey data, the stuff that Matt has been doing down there to calculate an IBI from scratch. But the presence absence data, we think, can give some reasonable approximation of condition. Sort of the risk with it is perhaps not collecting sensitive species when they're there. So if you're not really getting the sensitive species, you can underrate the stream. But presence of a sensitive species, as long as it's identified or not an accidental occurrence, is a sound measure usually. And I have a little program we did in some FoxPro data program, but we'd like to be able to recreate this in a Power BI or potentially even have a simple thing on a phone that you could use. And the idea would be that you'd enter, say, the two sensitive species. So, and this is some example output. This is a histogram. So if you collect sites where we have collected banded darters and variegated darters, this is the distribution of sites. And what you see here along this x-axis is the IBI score, and this is the number of samples in this histogram. And you can see if you get banded and variegated darters, most of the time you're getting, the mean is above that exceptional range. And even the lower percentiles are warm water with very few below that. So if you get those two species, you pretty much know you have a good to excellent stream. Another way of graphing the data, these are what are called probability plots. They're actually a little bit confusing, but it shows the same thing. So here I have 3 different scenarios. In black is the streams where we've got gravel chub and streamline chub. You can see there the distribution doesn't even extend past the good range, and this is on the bottom is the percent of score. So basically, this is the 50% line. So again, more than half of the times when you get those two species, you're in the exceptional range, and you never go below a warm water range if you get those two species. If you look at banded and rainbow darters, again, it's a broader distribution. But the median is still pretty high. So half the time you're getting near exceptional or exceptional scores, and 90% of the time it's greater than that warm water level. And there's a tail. You do occasionally get some in poor conditions, but a lot less often. And then I picked more tolerant species, black-nosed dace and creek chub, and this is probably pretty similar to the distribution of scores that we have if you just look at all the scores everywhere. So, basically half the scores are above that warm water level, half are below. So if you're getting black-nosed dace and creek chub, it's not telling you a lot about quality per se. You could have very, good scores. You could have very poor scores. It's really the sensitive things that are sort of give you a lot of that signal for this methodology. And I think there's a way we could develop this into like a simple even phone app where you'd basically pick the two species from a pull-down menu, and it might tell you, your probability or your percent that were excellent, good, fair, poor, very poor. So in narrative ranges. So you could, very quickly get, based on what you see, it'll tell you something about the quality of the stream. So just a way of translating data that you might pick up on species presence absence to the kind of more intensive data that's collected in our general surveys. I think that's basically what I have. I don't know if there are any questions.
In Matt's presentation, a couple of times he mentioned as methods of capturing trawl, bottom trawl, and benthic trawls. I don't. Could you just explain what those are?
Sure. So generally trawls they're basically nets that are being dragged by a boat. And they generally drag along the bottom and pick up species into the net, and then you pull up the nets to see what you have.
Yeah, we did some survey work. Like I think we included Little Miami and the Scioto and other things back in, I don't know, was it 2007, something like that. We did some trawl work. You do pick up a little bit different mix of species sometimes doing that. When you were talking about the buffalo, and I don't know if this has been found in Ohio, if anyone decides to eat buffalo. There have been cases of buffalo down in Louisiana eating water hemlock and then poisoning the people who eat them. And it's actually called Haft's disease. It's occurred in Europe, but they found it with buffalo down in southern states. I don't know if it's ever been found in Ohio. So it's something to be aware of if you want to try to fry up some buffalo. I don't know if that we see that. I don't know if that's been reported for Ohio, but just an interesting side light there.
Ed, on your discussion of your presence, absence, and tying into the IBIs, where are you on that? Is there, in terms of a rollout, that we might be able to utilize?
It's one of those things that I'm trying to find some time here and there. I contemplated looking for like a small education grant to maybe try to develop that little app. I don't think it'd be that difficult to do, and so I know the programming steps to do it. Just a matter of sort of trying to do it in something that's deliverable like that Power BI. And I think we can do it in that. One of the nice things about Power BI, and I haven't really used this feature of it, is that you can create a phone size app with it. So you can actually have a version that would be, it'd have to be a lot simpler, but it would be like a pull down for 2 species, and it would give you back sort of a percent by narrative category. 80% exceptional, 15% warm water, and 5% fair, or something like that.
How would this concept and this app at all fit in with the discussion that we've all had here regarding the statewide Ohio EPA monitoring strategy, or is this is more citizen oriented and shouldn't be confused with that, with the level 3?
Yeah, it gives you a range. So in other words, when we go out and do our level 3 survey, we get our sort of statistical or sort of range is usually within 4 points of that index. Here it's going to be broader, much broader than that. And so the error tendency again is if you miss some of the sensitive species. If you have good data on that, I think like for example, if you're getting gravel and streamlined chub, that's going to tell you a lot. Now, in a lot of the small streams, you may not have enough of the real sensitive ones to give you. It'd be a broader range, so it might say, yeah, this is probably good, but it's not going to give you quite as sharp a rating. So it's not really a replacement, but it could be useful, particularly if you're looking at it from lots of people doing it over time. That's where it might, so if you have people going out in a watershed and doing this, and you can, even though your error rate at any one point may be wide, if multiple sites and say a stream is continually coming back good or better, that gives you some confidence that it's probably pretty good. Or if you're not getting, if all the ones are coming down, your best 2 species are pretty tolerant, so it can put it into sort of some of these categories of sort of pass, fail, or potentially very good. But I'm not sure it has the resolution to, as sort of the regulatory resolution anyway that you might want for something.
Yeah.
But it could also send you to places where you want to then maybe collect more intensive data.
Okay.
The simple answer, Eric, is it's aimed at citizen science.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
It's clearly not a substitute for what Ohio EPA would do.
Yeah.
We do have a question about the photo on the title slide, Matt.
Yeah,
Where that
I answered it in the chat, but yes, that is Carl Ray Park.
yes, okay. That is, I don't know how you pronounce that last name.
Yeah, I just, is it, yeah.
It is Ray. Yeah, Carl
Okay.
Ray. Yeah,
Yeah.
Carl was
Carl Ray.
former president of the Conservancy and actually former president of the Cincinnati chapter of the Isaac Walton League. So a great guy. Great guy. We've lost him some years ago, but just a great guy.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad we used that picture.
Yeah.
Okay. Like I say, if they're in, people can follow up. We still have to select a date for the field day, and I think we'll, as an organization, MBI will be more comfortable with how we conduct field events after we do some training next week. And
Okay.
that's good. Our reality test on
Sure.
distancing in the field and how practical that is.
And when we do that, we'll be videotaping that as well. So it'll be a nice sort of a 3-part series. You know, yesterday's session, tonight's session, and then the field training as well. So should be a good set of baseline information for people. Some of the other, I would mention some of the other monitoring that the Conservancy has gotten involved in is a partnership with YSI Xylem to deploy some XO1 data sondes. Those are sort of high-tech versions of for dissolved oxygen and other parameters as well. So we're always looking for people to help us maintain those and do weekly visits out there and make sure they're nice and clean and collecting good data. So if any of you listening are interested in that, please give me a call at the Conservancy or the email is part@littlemiami.com. So I'll throw that plug in while we're wrapping up. Guys from MBI, you want to mention a little bit about your citizen science sessions and your training that you do, just in summary fashion for people that are listening to this?
Matt, can you pull up the second slide from your presentation? Yeah, this is on our website, and it is part of our training curriculum, so it's just one module of everything we offer. And we've recently begun to offer more citizen science volunteer level training. So right now we have an intermediate macroinvertebrate identification class. We have an introduction to wetlands, and then we have a citizen version of the QHEI, which you saw in the presentation there as the variable that we were plotting probability of capture for certain fish species, but it's a way to evaluate habitat quality in streams. So there is a citizens version of that we offer. And again, all of what we did with fish tonight, I think if we get some good feedback, will probably become another curriculum that we'll offer as well.
We've talked a lot about silt and substrate. What parts of the QHEI, what kind of metrics could you point to that would hone in on that?
We have in the regular QHEI, we have a number of components like the substrate. We have a embeddedness metric and a silt cover metric that are part of that. And then we have we also measure the general the two predominant sizes, and we actually get pretty good relationships between the overall substrate metric and then even the embeddedness and the silt cover are pretty good. Pretty good relationships with that. There are also other tools out there that we've done a little bit like a pebble count methods and so on that you can do if you're you want to measure trends in, say, sediment or silt over time, there are some other methodologies out there that are useful. But we've seen pretty good relationships with the QHEI and the substrate metric with and that's those graphs with the QHEI. You can actually do the same thing with the individual metrics. So you can actually look and see what species are associated with the substrate score, the probability of capture with substrate. And for example, for the darters, that works pretty well. So the really more sensitive darters are really pegged towards the coarser, cleaner, larger substrates. And so some of those darters are very sensitive to that. So you can actually pull that out of that index as well.
Yeah, that'd be great. I think nice to show over time as the embeddedness numbers have changed and these other substrate metrics. It'd be nice to show this and to complete a picture of that part of the puzzle. So maybe that's something we can work on.